So, as many of you know, the Democratic debates took place this past week. There was one on Tuesday, and there was another one on Wednesday. One of them featured Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren among about 8 other Democrats, and then the other debate featured Joe Biden, Tulsi Gabbard, Kamala Harris, among 7 other Democrats as well. So the first night of debates was very exciting. It was very interesting. Mainly, it seemed like it was Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren against everybody else, against the world. So they were kind of just going at it with all the other Democrats, especially when it came to progressive issues, because those are the 2 more progressive people in this crowded Democratic field. But I think many would agree, obviously, that Bernie Sanders is a lot more to the left than Elizabeth Warren is. So, as usual, there's articles and opinions that are out there that are kind of put out in the media and stuff. And the mainstream media obviously had their take. And I found one to be particularly preposterous regarding the performances of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So this article is from NBC News. It's written by somebody named Jonathan Allen, who's pretty much been like a mainstream media kind of, typical establishment type so-called journalist. And he wrote this for NBC News. And the title of the piece is The Warren-Sanders wing comes up short. And it says, analysis, the progressives looked it says, analysis, the progressives look to demonstrate that it would take big, bold ideas to beat President Donald Trump, but instead looked vulnerable to the more friendly fire of fellow Democrats. So let's get into it here. It starts out by saying the progressive all-stars lost in a draw, facing a field of more centrist Democrats trailing them in the 2020 presidential primary polls. Liberal Senators Bernie Sanders, Independent of Vermont, and Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, locked arms at Tuesday's CNN debate here to make the case for their, quote, Medicare-for-all health insurance plan and other, quote, bold progressive changes to public policy. If they were going to demonstrate convincingly that it would take big, bold progressive policy ideas to beat President Donald Trump, surely it would have helped to wipe the floor with the other 8 lower stature Democrats on stage with them. But that didn't happen. Not at all. If anything, they looked vulnerable to the more friendly fire of fellow Democrats. Warren and Sanders were ambushed before they could speak. And then this is quoting one of the irrelevant Democrats that was on the stage with them. It was, this one is John Delaney. It says, we can go down the road that Senator Sanders and Senator Warren want to take us, which is with bad policies like Medicare-for-all, free everything, and impossible promises that will turn off independent voters and get Trump reelected. And then it references that's actually obviously a quote from, as I said, a quote from John Delaney. And it says, who's owner of a 0.7% average in recent polls. And this is what he said in his opening remarks that compared the senators to defeated liberal Democratic nominees George McGovern, Michael Dukakis, and Walter Mondale. Over the course of the next 2 hours, Warren and Sanders insisted that only sweeping changes that would fundamentally change political and financial structures would both motivate voters to go to the polls and improve their lives. We have to think of this in the big frame, Warren said. These insurance companies don't have a God-given right to make $23 billion in profits and suck it out of their healthcare system. And the field countered the way that Representative Tim Ryan, Democrat of Ohio, did when he criticized Sanders' explanation of the Medicare-for-all proposal because it would move union workers out of private insurance plans. It's bad policy, Ryan said, and it's certainly bad politics. Democratic strategists who watched the back and forth between 2 ideological sides in the party said it was tough to say which one won. There is a clear fight for the soul of the party, said Chris Kofinis, who has worked on Democratic presidential campaigns in past 2 election cycles. It's just not clear based on this debate who's winning. I think it's pretty obvious that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren won that debate for sure. And I said as much in my post-debate coverage as well. Recent polling suggests that together, Sanders and Warren have about 1/3 of the primary electorate behind them, which is in line with the share that favors frontrunner and former Vice President Joe Biden. But there are no other candidates in the race who are consistently progressive on issues or as persistently aggressive in their pitch for big changes as Warren and Sanders. That puts the onus on them to build a stronger following among Democratic primary voters, either it's tandem or separately, to capture the nomination for their wing of the party. It says, this was the left's first big shot, and it just didn't hit. Almost seemed like a draw, which is a reflection of where Democrats are in terms of those who want to see real progressive changes on healthcare versus those who want to improve upon our current policies and defeat Trump. Adrian Elrod, a former aide to Hillary Clinton and an MSNBC political contributor, said in a text message. Of course, that wasn't the read from the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which has all but trademarked the term bold progressive, endorsed Warren, and has been supportive of Sanders. The conservative Democrats came at Warren Sanders. Warren Sanders, I guess, combining the name, and the progressive, or the two names, and the progressive tag team won because their bold ideas are both popular and good policy. Stephanie Taylor, co-founder of the PCCC, said in a statement, "The 1-2 punch of Warren and Sanders won the debate by making the case for a bold, progressive, transformational presidency that proposes big solutions to the big problems in people's lives." But there are Democrats who believe that the big change theory could be too much for swing voters in the states that their party needs to win to capture the White House. More incremental policy adjustments offered by candidates such as Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, Ryan, referring to Tim Ryan, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, could resonate better in those places, they argue. Let's be honest, D.C., New York, Boston, and California are progressive echo chambers, just like Democratic Twitter. Ben LaBolt, a former aide to President Barack Obama, said in an email, "Midwesterners are practical and pragmatic people who, in my experience, are less into bold ideological reforms than they are chipping away at issues that matter to their families. By leading so strongly on ideology, Warren and Sanders may not ultimately be reaching the persuadable voters in the battleground states. For now, Warren and Sanders still have work to do to win the war within the Democratic Party." So, obviously, I don't agree at all with this contention about Warren and, first of all, like I said, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, not in that particular order. I think Sanders did better than Warren. Obviously, I have a bias, but that's just how I saw it. But I believe that they definitely won the debate. They were the winners of the debate. I called it. After the debate, my post debate analysis, and I said that they won, and I still believe it regardless of what these articles say. And at the end of the day, I don't care what I've said this before, I don't care what these Democratic strategists have to say. These people are not in touch with reality. These Democratic strategists just want to push whatever establishment Democratic loyalist talking points they want. They don't want to push the idea of any kind of bold change, obviously, because even they admit that. So it's not particularly surprising. But when it comes down to really understanding what the American people want and what the American people are going through, they don't understand that because they're working for, politicians in Washington. They're working for think tanks. A lot of them have either been lobbyists or are in have some sort of relationship as far as talking to lobbyists a lot. So they hear what lobbyists want to say and want to do. So they just push whatever those people say, and think tanks, lobbyists, other fellow aides and stuff, aides that work for the politicians, and let alone strategists, and and just people that are on cable news and stuff, because a lot of the people appear on cable news as well. These people do not know anything outside of what they're programmed to believe by their kind of influence of Washington, D.C. and being inside that bubble. That's what they're in. They're in a bubble, and they don't really understand what it's like to be outside that bubble. Now, maybe obviously they go to different states and they talk with different people, but what they try and instill in the minds of those people, instead of actually listening to what the people have to say, instead of trying to listen, they instill in those people's minds, in whether it's Iowa, Ohio, I don't know, Virginia, throw any West, any kind of Rust Belt swing state out there, Wisconsin, Michigan. They tell these people that no, we need to do pragmatism. We need to do what's enough to not make too big of a change, because we don't want to scrap what we already have. So what they do is they fearmonger about how, like, oh my God, for example, if we change Obamacare, so if we get, let's say, a Medicare-for-all plan, that's going to get rid of Obamacare. So this is a fearmongering point, that Joe Biden was putting out there. And he was telling everybody that if we get Medicare-for-all, if we do Medicare-for-all, it's going to mean the end of Obamacare. And, obviously Biden wanting to attach himself at the hip to President Obama, because that's his buddy Barack, as he calls him. And obviously he was his VP, but he still wants to attach himself at the hip to Obama, because he knows that Obama's policies are, among Democratic partisans, is like 80 to 90% popular, basically. Putting aside like all the kind of like right-wing Democrats and even many moderate Democrats. But like if you ask any like left-leaning or even like left Democrat out there, I'm talking Democrats, not like leftists. I'm just talking people that are in Democratic like circles. They love Obama. They're like fucking obsessed with him. They think he's the fucking shit, essentially, and they think everything he did was right. You can't, how dare you attack anything that he says or has done? And this is something that you hear that you heard after the debate. People were saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe anybody is attacking President Obama. That is not a smart strategy," from typical mainstream elitist types and, strategists and other, kind of people that are involved in the Democratic movement, in the kind of the party's establishment. And, they were saying that. And, so obviously the message among those kind of establishment type politicians and candidates is going to be to just talk about how, Obama is a great guy. All the policies that he's put forth are wonderful. And if he criticizes, it's terrible. And that's definitely something Biden has put forth, for sure. Now, when it comes to all the other candidates, maybe they don't necessarily say like, they don't necessarily go down the path of like, obsessing over Obama as much. And I don't think they're not stupid enough to like, they're not stupid enough to make it as obvious as Joe Biden would. So in many cases, it's just a matter of like kind of praising the Democratic, quote unquote Democratic ideals. But at the end of the day, they want to, obviously they just want to maintain whatever, status quo the party has already put forth. And anything that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren put out there, God forbid you embrace that. Because if you embrace that, then you're just being too far left, which is bullshit. Because on an international standpoint, on an international spectrum, on a scale of what's going on around the world, getting Medicare for all, debt-free college, getting rid of student loan debt, because we're in a student loan debt crisis, having a living wage, let alone a $15 minimum wage, ending the wars, these are not radical things. These are all things that, every industrialized country across the world has either done or they just believe in and they just push for it, And when Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren say these things to Americans on a large standpoint, and even unfortunately Democrats, that to them is too extreme, because you don't want to get away from the status quo. And for a long time, I always believed that the Democratic Party was actually like far left. Well, not far left, but I felt they were on the left. But that was largely because they believed in like the social issues, so gay marriage and, not being racist and, believing in, like being pro-choice or believing reproductive rights. In my mind, I was like, oh yeah, they must be liberal, right? They must be left. But that's not true. They're not. This was back when I was like still kind of like a Democratic loyalist myself. But I'm far and away from that that frame of mind now. I don't believe anything close to that now, thank God. And I know what errors the Democratic Party has made because I was witness to it. And a lot of it is just, they still make these mistakes. They just like they can't get away from like this horrible like disease of just doing the same exact thing again and again. It's this ridiculous mentality where you have to like be establishment, you have to be status quo or else, and that's truly what they believe. And it's really it's unfortunate considering this the state of our country and the fact that we're our country, the world, our globe is suffering through climate change, ridiculous amounts of climate change, ridiculous amounts of, debt inequality, whether it's in this country or around the world. It's like that, as Bernie Sanders says, what is it, 5 or 6 people own, 50% of the wealth in this world. I mean, come on. So, and I don't know if I think it's 5 or 6 people. He said it multiple times, so that's the number I remember. But if you want to fact check me on that, that's perfectly fine. But the fact that, it's the fact that that is the case, whether it's 50%, whether it's a third, whether it's a fourth, whatever, like that amount of money that people, because, there's 7 billion people in this world. And when, just a few people or however many people, like kind of a low number of people are, they kind of own all that wealth while everybody else is suffering. That's a fucking problem. No matter how much, no matter like even if that number is just a little bit bigger, that still wouldn't fix the problem. We need to, as many people on the left know, and as many people, obviously far, people that are leftists in this country, far leftists in this country, progressives and stuff, we know. But I mean, if you talk to people that are in, even Democrats, they believe in like ending, income inequality and, not, kind of narrowing that gap and stuff, instead of widening it even more and more. But, if you talk to the establishment status quo people, they don't care about that stuff. They just want to do that. They want to do all that stuff incrementally. And it's so typical of these establishment, so-called journalists and stenographers for the establishment to come out there and say, well, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders didn't win the debate because, I don't know, ask a bunch of stupid, out of touch strategists and people that, are in Washington and in that bubble. So, but those people don't know anything. But if you go and talk to, those people don't know shit. But if you actually go and speak to people that are suffering, people that are in all those Rust Belt states, middle of the country states, they know what's happening that needs fixing, and it's the problems that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are putting out there. More Bernie Sanders than Elizabeth Warren, but they're both at least speaking to that ideology, to that mentality. And Bernie Sanders has been totally consistent on that. He's called himself a democratic socialist or a social democrat. Elizabeth Warren is a little bit more to the right because she calls herself a capitalist, but either way, they are saying the right things, and that's good to see. I've been very critical of Elizabeth Warren because I feel like she's a little bit of an opportunist, and I think that she may not be as genuine in what she's saying, but at least she's saying the right things, Unfortunately, I hope a lot of people don't fall for that. I just kind of see her more as a gatekeeper for progressives and to kind of just be there to back up Bernie. And, Bernie is the guy that I want, and that's the guy that many people on the left obviously want. And he is popular, he's well known, he's making inroads with all different, demographics and people in this country, even people that are not on the left, even people that are disaffected Trump voters. He's making inroads with. So these people don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know what whatever they type into their articles. It's just misinformed or they're just making arguments that just repeat the arguments that the people in Washington believe. That's it. They're just stenographers for DC elites basically. And Bernie Sanders and to some extent Elizabeth Warren are fighting back against that. And I'm happy to see that they are doing that because nobody else really seems to be doing it in our current political climate, especially in DC.